In North America, in these English colonies, we will of course see changes in fashion over time, although they tend to be well behind the changes in Europe. So you might see a style in Europe that goes until, for example, 1730, but you will see it happening in in North America primarily, all the way up to, say, 1750 or 1780. It takes longer for things to get over. Also, remember, they're starting from a very early point. They're focused on survival at first, and they're not focused on creating really skilled wood craftsmen, carpentry. Instead, they're focused on survival. So we're seeing that. We're seeing an evolution here as we move into the American William and Mary style. Now, Japanning and painted furniture is going to be very, very common. Again, we don't have that use of relief, but Japanning is going to be very, very popular in this period. And the Japanning that's done in this period frequently involves the application of gesso to the form. So you get this very light relief carving in the gesso that's applied to the wood and then painted over. It's very light, it's very subtle, but it does give a certain three-dimensionality to the piece, and it stands out. It's not something that is easily reproduced. Generally speaking, this would be painted directly on the wood, and then the gesso is going to be very, very thin, usually less than 1/8 of an inch thick. So let's talk about William and Mary seating in America. And I keep saying America because we're not quite to the federal period yet. We haven't passed the American Revolutionary War. Now, one of the interesting things we're going to see is the use of the Spanish foot or the paintbrush foot. This is a very interesting form. It's a flowing form. We often see it at the end of a turned leg, and it's very, very simple. If I were to carve it, I need two sides that are 90 degrees. Sometimes the back will be carved, sometimes it's not. And then I'm basically gouging it out and sanding it to create this sort of paintbrush effect. Sometimes they curve back on themselves, but the back will have some kind of central support through it. So interesting variations, but something we only see typically from the American William and Mary style. Then we have the Bannister-Back Chair. Now, in this period, the Bannister-Back Chair is a very simple form. The banister is simply using wooden slats for the back of the chair. Oftentimes, the upper rail is going to have some kind of decorative cut. Sometimes there will be relief carving, but not often. That tends to be a higher end piece, and oftentimes these are going to be painted. Again, we are dealing with woven seats. There's a lot of reasons there, everything from expense to comfort to materials that are available. And in the example on the right, you can see that paintbrush or Spanish foot in use on the front. But you'll notice the back legs have no decoration whatsoever until you get above the level of the seat. Very, very common for almost all chairs of the period. Then we have the development of the Boston chair. And the Boston chair is going to incorporate some interesting details. As we come up into the chair rail at the back, usually we have a shoulder running in, so we've kind of got a form where this chair rail runs into the central splat and then creates a decorative form at the top. They frequently have turned legs and turned stretchers. So what they're doing is they're trying to create a version of the Flemish scroll chair, but of course they aren't really familiar with some of the carving techniques that are being used. So a turn stretcher, of course, replaces the ornately carved William and Mary version, and the crest rail is going to be simplified, forming shoulders at both sides. Then we see the development of the Easie Chair. And this, of course, looks an awful lot like some of the Jacobean forms and other forms that we've seen in England, where we have those wings being added to the chair. Here I'm showing you the frame of the chair and then an upholstered version of exactly the same chair. And the wings are there to keep out draft, very similar to the Jacobean settee that we talked about earlier. We've got that scroll work that's going into it. But you notice it's very, very simple. I'm just trying to create the shape. There's not a lot of hand carving going in. Here again, we have the use of the paintbrush foot and turn stretchers running underneath the chair. But again, those turn stretchers are easy to create. I'm using a lathe to do it, and the joinery is fairly simple. So you're seeing the influence coming from England and elsewhere, but there's always elements of simplification. Oftentimes we're going to see elements that were originally relief carved, they're now going to be turned. We're going to see a variety of changes taking place, and it doesn't mean that this furniture is lesser. It means that they are developing their skills over time. Eventually, some of the court furniture from the Americas, or will be built in the Americas for the English court. We'll also see, for example, Chippendale coming out in the Americas as well. Now, we'll also see, of course, William and Mary's storage. And there are two forms we're looking at, the Highboy and the Lowboy. The Highboy tends to be, again, that massive chest of drawers, but in the American version, it is very, very simple. We don't have a large crown to it. We simply have a molded cornice. The legs are very simple. It's basically a take on our trumpet leg with the inverted cup motif that we've seen before, but you'll see it's simplified. This is turned into a couple of balls and then just a simple narrowing spindle. So, and here we have the bun feet with this stretcher, and you'll notice the stretcher isn't carved. There's no relief to it. It's simply been cut. Basically, today it would be cut on a bandsaw, cut to form, but you'll notice it is the same thickness. There's no relief to it whatsoever throughout. Now, the Lowboy is going to be very common. Oftentimes, you would have a set. So you would have the Highboy and a matching Lowboy to go with it. And the Lowboy would be used for toiletries. Oftentimes, you would have a bowl and pitcher for washing yourself sitting on here. It might be used as a dressing table. So these would be the materials that you need to get ready for the morning. And then you have the tabletop to work with. Now, the Lowboy just simply lacks all of the extra drawers and accoutrement that we generally see with the Highboy. And it's been shortened, but we still have very similar decorative forms. Here we have a decorative apron with cut-in arch as well as points. We have scrollwork legs, so these beautiful spirals, sometimes called Solemnic legs, that are used. And then we have our bun foot, and this gives us a better impression of that stretcher running underneath it as well. Now, these stretchers are really common in American versions, even though they've been cut out in the English and European versions. And that's because at the end of the day, that use of a stretcher at the base of the foot or at the base of the leg is going to make the piece far stronger, speaking to the pragmatism that is at the center of the American colonial experience